Hi, I'm Maya Tremblay, and if you'd told me 5 years ago that my own family would try to erase everything I'd built, I would have laughed. But sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the very ones who will look you in the eye and decide you're disposable. This is the story of how I lost everything in a single evening and took it all back by morning. It started the way most things in my family did, quietly, in the back of a restaurant that smelled like garlic butter and old wood. My dad, Marcel Tremblay, opened La Maison Tremblay in Gatineau, Quebec, when I was 4 years old. It was a small French-Canadian bistro, the kind of place where the menus were laminated and the specials were written on a chalkboard by hand. He ran it with my mom until she passed when I was 12, and after that, it became something more than a restaurant to all of us. It was her memory, baked into every recipe, every tablecloth, every crack in the front window that Dad refused to fix because she had once said it gave the place character. My brother Olivier was 6 years older than me, and from the time I could remember, he was the one everyone looked at when they talked about the future of our family. He was tall, charming, and funny in the way that made strangers trust him immediately. He had Dad's laugh and Mom's eyes, and growing up, I used to think he hung the moon. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in the kitchen doing homework on a prep table while Dad finished the dinner rush, the one who learned to read a profit and loss statement before I learned to drive. By the time I was 17, I was doing the bookkeeping on weekends, not because anyone asked me to, because I could see that the numbers weren't adding up and I didn't want to watch my dad lose the only thing he had left of my mother. Olivier, meanwhile, was living in Toronto. He had gone there at 22 chasing something he could never quite name a music career, then a startup, then a marketing consultancy that I'm not entirely sure ever had more than 2 clients. Dad would call him every Sunday and come away from those conversations beaming, telling me how well Olivier was doing, how much potential he had. I would nod and go back to reconciling the vendor invoices. The year I turned 23, I sat down with my dad and laid out a proposal I had been working on for 8 months. The restaurant was breaking even, but barely. The dining room was dated, our online presence was non-existent, and we were losing weekend traffic to a newer spot that had opened 3 blocks away. My proposal included a full renovation plan, a catering arm to generate off-peak revenue, a local sourcing strategy that would actually reduce food costs while improving quality, and a very modest ask. Let me take over operations officially and give me the authority to implement these changes. Dad looked at my binder 43 pages, tabbed and indexed, and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You remind me of your mother when she gets an idea in her head." That was the best thing he ever said to me. He gave me the go-ahead. I enrolled in a part-time business management program at a local college while running the restaurant full-time. I negotiated new supplier contracts. I hired a graphic designer friend to redo our signage and launch a proper social media presence. I convinced Dad to let me turn the unused back room into a private dining space we could rent for events. Within 18 months, our revenue had doubled. Within 3 years, we had opened a second location in Ottawa's Byward Market. By the time I was 28, La Maison Tremblay had 3 locations, a catering division serving corporate clients across the National Capital Region, an annual revenue that had grown from just under $400,000 to just over $3 million. We had been featured in Ottawa Magazine. We had a wait list for Saturday night reservations. Dad would sometimes walk through the dining room during a full service and just stand there with this look on his face, part wonder, part grief, like he couldn't believe how far we'd come and wished my mom could see it. I lived for that look. Olivier came home for Christmas, the year the second location opened. He toured the new space, ate the tasting menu I had spent 3 weeks developing, and said, with genuine warmth, "Little sis, you actually pulled it off." I thought that was a compliment. I didn't understand yet that it was also the moment he started paying attention. He moved back to Gatineau the following spring. He told Dad he was ready to settle down, that he wanted to be part of the family business, that he had learned so much from his years in Toronto and had so much to offer. Dad, who had never entirely stopped hoping his son would come home, welcomed him with open arms. He introduced Olivier to our suppliers, our staff, our regulars. He took him to the Ottawa location and showed him around with the same pride he used to show photos of us as kids. I was genuinely happy to have my brother back at first. I thought we could build something together. Olivier had other ideas. It started small. He began sitting in on my meetings with suppliers and then, gradually, leading them. He started making changes to the floor layout at the Gatineau location without telling me. He hired 2 front-of-house staff on his own and introduced them to Dad before I even knew they'd been brought on. Every time I raised an issue, he had an explanation that sounded perfectly reasonable. On the surface, he was just trying to help. He had a connection. He thought I was too busy to deal with it. And every time I went to Dad, Dad would say something like, "He's just finding his footing, Maya. Give him a chance." Over the next year and a half, Olivier slowly rewrote his own role in the company's story. In conversations with investors we were courting for a potential 4th location, he positioned himself as the driving force behind our growth. In interviews with local press, which he had started doing without telling me, he talked about his vision for the brand, his passion for French-Canadian cuisine, his commitment to the community. The journalist who wrote our Ottawa magazine profile had actually asked to interview me specifically, and somehow, Olivier ended up as the primary subject. I told myself it didn't matter. The work was what mattered. The restaurants were thriving. I kept my head down. Then came Dad's 65th birthday. Olivier planned the whole event. He reserved the private dining room at our original Gatineau location for a Friday evening and invited about 60 people, family friends, longtime regulars, our key suppliers, the local city councillor, who had helped us navigate a zoning issue 2 years earlier. It was, on the surface, a beautiful evening. The room was decorated with old photos of the restaurant going back to the early days, including several of my mom. The kitchen team prepared a prefix menu I had designed for the occasion. The wine was excellent. I arrived early to make sure everything was in order. I was wearing a dark green dress that I had bought specifically for the occasion, and I remember being in a genuinely good mood. Dad had turned 65. The business was healthy. My brother was home. Whatever tensions existed between us, I told myself this was a night to set them aside. Olivier gave me a tight smile when I walked in and said, "You look tired. Have you been sleeping?" I should have known then. The dinner was warm and lovely. People told stories about my dad, about the early days of the restaurant, about my mom. A few people made small toasts. I gave a short speech that made my dad tear up, and he hugged me for a long time afterward and whispered that she would have been so proud. Then Olivier stood up. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about what La Maison Tremblay meant to the community, what it meant to the family, what it meant to him personally. And then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said it was time to talk about the future. "Every business reaches a point where it has to evolve," he said, "where it needs leadership that can take it to the next level. Dad, I've spoken with our investors and our key partners, and there's unanimous agreement that La Maison Tremblay is ready to scale. We're looking at 5 locations by 2027, a potential franchise model, and a much stronger brand presence nationally." There was a murmur of appreciation around the room. "But to do that," he continued, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who has rehearsed this many times, "we need to consolidate our leadership structure. Maya has done incredible work, keeping the lights on and managing the day-to-day. She's been a dedicated operator, and we're all grateful for that." I felt the room shift. But scaling a brand requires a different set of skills. It requires vision, strategic relationships, and the ability to make bold decisions without being bogged down in the details. Which is why, effective immediately, I'll be taking over as CEO of La Maison Tremblay Incorporated. Maya will be moving into a back-office role focused on administration and vendor management. It's a role that better suits her strengths. The silence lasted about 3 seconds. Then a few people started clapping, clearly uncertain whether this was good news or not. My father, sitting at the head of the table with his napkin still tucked into his collar, nodded slowly. Not the nod of someone hearing a surprise. The nod of someone confirming something, already decided. Olivier looked at me across the room, and in a voice that was somehow both gentle and absolutely cutting, he said, You've been carrying a lot for a long time, little sis. It's okay to let someone else drive now. You were never really built for the big picture. The room went very quiet. I sat there for a moment and looked at my dad. He was looking at the table. My aunt, who had been watching me from across the room, had her hand over her mouth. I thought about crying. I thought about arguing. I thought about every invoice I had ever reconciled, every supplier negotiation I had ever won, every 3 a.m. I had ever spent at the restaurant, working through a staffing crisis or a broken piece of kitchen equipment. And then I thought about something else entirely. Something I had put in place very quietly, 18 months earlier, when I first started to understand where this was going. I folded my napkin, placed it carefully on the table, walked to my dad, and kissed him on the cheek. "Happy birthday," I said. "I love you." Then I picked up my coat and my bag, smiled at my aunt, and walked out the front door. The drive home took 11 minutes. I know because I counted. I was at my laptop by 9:30. By 1 in the morning, I had sent emails to every single one of our corporate catering clients. I had called our 2 most senior kitchen leads, both of whom had been with me since the beginning. I had reviewed 3 legal documents that I had asked a lawyer friend to help me draft almost a year earlier, before I had even let myself fully acknowledge that I might need them. And I had sent one final email to our bookkeeper, our head of events, and our main produce supplier, all of whom had personal working relationships with me, specifically with a very clear explanation of what was about to happen in the morning. Then, I made a cup of tea and went to sleep at 2:15. I arrived at the Gatineau location at 8 a.m. The morning prep crew was already in, and they greeted me the way they always did. I made myself a coffee and sat at the small desk in the office just off the kitchen, and I waited. Olivier and my dad arrived together at 9:45, both looking like men who had enjoyed a very good night and expected the morning to match. Olivier was wearing a new jacket. Dad was carrying 2 coffees from the shop down the street, which told me Olivier had already started treating him like a partner in whatever was about to happen. They found me at the desk. Olivier's smile faltered for just a moment. "Maya, you're here early." "I'm here at my normal time," I said. "Sit down, both of you. There are a few things we should go over before you start making any announcements to the staff." Dad set down his coffees. He looked uneasy. Olivier crossed his arms. "There's nothing to go over," Olivier said. "Last night was clear. I've already sent a staff memo." "I know," I said. "I got the forwarded copy at 6 this morning. Let's talk about a few things that memo didn't cover." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. La Maison Tremblay Incorporated was incorporated 7 years ago when I formalized the business structure. At that time, Dad held 60% of shares, and I held 40. 2 years ago, when I needed to restructure our supplier financing, and Dad didn't have the bandwidth to manage the paperwork. Do you remember, Dad? You were recovering from your knee surgery and you asked me to handle everything? I prepared the documentation myself. The new agreement reduced Dad's share to 34% and brought mine to 66%. Dad signed it along with about 40 other documents that month. I want to be transparent. I should have been more explicit about what he was signing. That's on me. But the paperwork is legal, it was witnessed, and it was filed with our corporate solicitor. My dad's face went through several changes very quickly. Olivier uncrossed his arms. "That can't be right. I can pull up the filing if you'd like," I said. "But there's more." I clicked to the next document. The catering division, which accounts for roughly 42% of total revenue, operates under a separate legal entity that I incorporated personally 3 years ago. It's called Tremblay Table Incorporated, and La Maison Tremblay has a service agreement with it. That service agreement expired 4 days ago. I chose not to renew it. My dad sat down. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 4 minutes. "The recipes," I continued. "Specifically, the 12 signature dishes that appear on all 3 menus and form the core of our brand identity. Those were developed by me, documented under my name, and protected under a culinary IP agreement our lawyer drew up 2 years ago. La Maison Tremblay has a usage license for those recipes. That license is attached to my continued involvement in the company in a leadership capacity. A leadership capacity, I'll note, that your memo last night formally terminated. Olivier stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the tile. You planned this. I protected myself, I said. There's a difference. I spent 5 years building this business. I watched you come back, take credit for what I built, and spend a year and a half positioning yourself to push me out. And last night you did it in front of 60 people at our father's birthday party. So yes, I had a plan. Dad! Olivier turned to my father. Tell her this isn't what we agreed. My dad was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was very low. What did we agree, Olivier? That it was time to take her work away from her? Dad's voice broke slightly on the last word. That's what we agreed? The kitchen hummed behind us. Outside, a delivery truck was pulling up to the back. Here is what I am proposing, I said, keeping my voice steady. Option 1. I walk away completely. Tremblay Table, Incorporated, dissolves its service agreement. The recipe licenses revert to personal use only. The catering clients, most of whom signed personal service clauses specifically because of their relationship with me, have already been notified of the leadership change, and based on the responses I received this morning, several of them will be following me. La Maison Tremblay continues to operate under Olivier's leadership using the original core menu, without catering, without about a third of its current revenue, and without the staff members who are employed through Tremblay Table. I wish you sincerely all the best. Neither of them said anything. Option 2. Olivier steps back into an advisory and brand ambassador role, which, honestly, suits what he is actually good at. Dad retains his shares and his role as founder. I resume operational leadership with the title of CEO, which reflects what I have been doing for the past 5 years. We bring in an external board member to ensure proper governance going forward, and we move on. Olivier looked at me for a long time. The easy confidence he had carried into the room was completely gone. What was underneath it was harder to read, something between anger and the particular shame of a person who has just understood the dimensions of their own mistake. You would really walk away? He said. From everything we built? Everything I built, I said. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just true. My dad reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His eyes were wet. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one. Not now, but I owe you one. I know, I said. The meeting with our corporate lawyer happened the following Tuesday. By the end of the week, the new operating agreement was signed. Olivier took a 6-month leave, which quietly became permanent. He went back to Toronto eventually, and we still talk on the phone, though less often than we used to, and the conversations have a careful quality to them now, like we're both navigating around something we can't fully name yet. Dad retired gradually over the following year, handing off more and more to me as he found his footing in a new phase of life. He still comes in most Friday mornings, sits at the corner table by the window, orders a café au lait and a croissant, and reads the paper. The staff loves him. The regulars know to stop by his table. Sometimes I sit with him for a few minutes before the lunch rush, and we don't always talk. Sometimes we just sit in the restaurant my mother loved, in the building that became something I never fully expected it to, and I think about how much can change and how much can stay the same all at once. The 4th location opened 8 months after that birthday party. We chose a space in Westboro, and the opening night was the best service we had ever run. I stood in the dining room at the end of it, after the last guests had left, and the kitchen team was winding down, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clean, uncomplicated pride. Not the kind that comes from proving someone wrong. That satisfaction fades faster than you'd think. The kind that comes from knowing that what you built is real, that it holds weight, that it was worth the years of early mornings and late nights and silent moments where you kept going even when no one was watching. My aunt, who had been at the birthday dinner and had called me the next day simply to say, "I see you," came to the Westboro opening. At the end of the evening, she found me near the bar and said, "Your mother would have been impossible to be around tonight." She would have been bragging to absolutely everyone. I laughed, and it surprised me a little, how good it felt. There are things I want to say to anyone who is in the middle of something similar, and I know from the people who have reached out to me since I first shared pieces of this story publicly that there are more of you than you might expect. The first is this: document everything. Not because you're planning for betrayal, but because what you build deserves a record. Your ideas, your contracts, your contributions, keep them somewhere that belongs to you. The second is that silence is not the same as weakness. There is a particular kind of strength that looks, from the outside, like patience. The people who underestimate you because you don't announce yourself in every room are doing you a favor they don't understand yet. The third is that loyalty should be earned continuously, not assumed because of blood or history. Love your family. Be generous with them. But do not confuse love with surrender. And the last thing, the one I come back to most often when I'm sitting at that corner table with my dad on a Friday morning, is that the goal was never revenge. The goal was always the restaurant, the warmth of a full dining room, the smell of something good coming from the kitchen, the particular satisfaction of watching a meal you designed land on a table and seeing someone's face change when they take the first bite. That's what I was protecting. Everything else was just the cost of protecting it. La Maison Tremblay is still here. So am I. And honestly, that's enough.